Once upon a time, I was evaluated by a neurologist and he reviewed everything. He had run his assessments, and in the end, he told me that I hadn't performed as well as I could have due to anxiety. I kind of sat with that, and the thing I kept coming back to was I didn't feel anxious. I hadn't felt anxious in that room. I felt focused, careful, like I wanted to get it right. But he was a doctor and he had credentials and the tools and the clinical framework. And I had a lifetime of learning that other people's reads on me were probably more accurate than my own. So I filed it away. I guess I'm anxious. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that. Other people had named anxiety in me before because of how much I wanted to get things right, how thoroughly I'd explain something, how carefully I'd choose my words in an email. From the outside, that looked like fear of getting it wrong. Nobody was asking what it felt like from the inside. And I had learned along the way not to trust my own answer to that question anyway. I'm Rachel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and EMDR certified trauma therapist. I specialize in childhood trauma, religious trauma, and cult recovery. And lately, I've been working with a lot of adults who have discovered late in life that they are actually autistic, and kind of helping them understand what comes with finally having a framework that actually fits their own experience. And what I want to talk about today is what happens when your own sense of your inner world is consistently overridden by what your behavior looks like on the outside to everyone watching. Here's what being a highly masked autistic person can do to you over time. The outside and the inside can get so far apart that even trained clinicians, even people who love you, are essentially reading a performance and calling it a diagnosis. The outside shows someone who monitors carefully, prepares thoroughly, wants to get things right, explains things completely, chooses words with precision. Every clinical framework available has a name for that behavior pattern. Anxiety, social anxiety, anxious attachment, perfectionism driven by fear. The frameworks are built to explain what behavior looks like, and this behavior fits them well enough that the question underneath rarely gets asked. The question underneath is, what is actually driving this? Because there are two very different answers that produce almost identical behavior from the outside. The first one is fear. The other is a brain that doesn't receive certain kinds of social information automatically and has spent years building systems to compensate. The person driven by fear knows the fear. They feel it. It lives in their body. An elevated heart rate, the dread, the shame spiral after something goes wrong. Their inner world is loud with it. The person compensating for a neurological difference often feels something much quieter. The carefulness isn't dread, it's precision. The preparation isn't about managing fear of judgment. It's a genuine workaround for a brain that doesn't process implicit social information in real time. The wanting to get it right isn't performance anxiety. It's that getting it right has always required actual effort in a way that it doesn't seem to for most people. And when someone looks at that carefulness and calls it anxiety, but you don't feel anxious, you've never felt anxious, something about that label has never quite fit, your instinct is correct. The outside was being misread. The frameworks available only had anxiety to explain it, but your inner world knew something different, and you were trained not to trust it. That's what I want to talk about. Not just the diagnostic distinction, though that does matter, but the specific experience of having your inner world consistently misread, deferring to everyone else's version of you because you learned that your own perception wasn't reliable, and what it means to finally have a framework that fits. Before I go further, I want to define what anxious attachment really is, because it's real and the distinction I'm drawing only works if I'm accurate about what I'm distinguishing it from. Anxious attachment is driven by fear of abandonment, and it usually develops early in response to caregiving that was inconsistent, love that was present and then withdrawn, early experiences that left someone with a deep sense that connection is fragile and loss is always around the corner. The monitoring in anxious attachment is emotional. It's watching for signs that someone is pulling away because historically, pulling away meant something devastating was coming. The reassurance seeking, the following up, the replaying of interactions. It's all in service of managing a fear that is loud and present and lives in the body. And it responds to the right work. EMDR can be very effective here because it goes directly to the early relational experiences that installed that fear in the first place. When those memories lose their charge, the hypervigilance often softens with them. Good relational therapy, safe experiences that slowly contradict the fear, those things move the needle over time. So when I say the anxious label might not fit you, I'm not saying your monitoring isn't real. I'm not saying that the effort you put into your relationships is imaginary. I'm saying the driver might be something this framework was never designed to explain, and that changes what healing is actually supposed to look like. Most people have an internal filter or something like a background social processor. It runs without them thinking about it. It reads the room, picks up on tone and subtext, tracks the ambient sense of where a relationship stands. Most people have no idea this is happening because they've never had to do it consciously. It just runs. For a lot of autistic people, especially the highly masked ones, the ones nobody would ever guess, that background processor is slower, less reliable, or just not there in the way it is for other people. And because it's not there, you build workarounds, you pay closer attention, you prepare more carefully, you choose your words deliberately, not because you're afraid of being judged, but because the automatic editing process that most people don't notice themselves doing has to happen on purpose for you. You want to get it right because getting it right takes real work in a way that it doesn't seem to for anyone else. And in fast-moving, unscripted situations, sometimes the system just goes offline. Not anxious, blank. A processing gap where the automatic social responses aren't available when you reach for them. So you build around that too. Scripts before hard conversations, notes before networking events, bullet points so nothing important gets lost. Not because you're scared, but because without them, something essential might not be there when you need it. And afterward, the replaying, going back through what happened, trying to figure out what you missed, what you could do better next time. And I spent years thinking that was rumination, anxious picking apart of how I came across. But the texture of it isn't shame or dread. There's no catastrophizing in it. It's more like running a diagnostic on what happened so you can do better next time. The question isn't, what did they think of me? It's, what did I miss and what do I do with that? It's the same behavior as anxious rumination, but there's a completely different inner world. This shows up in friendships in a way worth naming specifically. Anxiously attached people monitor friendships from fear. Fear the friend is pulling away, fear they've done something wrong, fear of losing someone. The monitoring is reactive. It's chasing. What I'm describing feels different from the inside. You might be the one initiating most of the time, following up, making plans, holding the connection together, not because you're scared the friendship will end if you don't, but because the sense of where a relationship stands that most people seem to just have doesn't come automatically for you. You have to build it deliberately. The friendship feels solid. You're not anxious about losing it. You're just maintaining it in a way that your other friends don't seem to need to. You're not chasing, you're building, and those feel different even when they look the same from the outside. Let's address how religious trauma adds layers and complexity to this. For most of the people I work with, this is where everything gets completely fused together and nearly impossible to pull apart. High control religious environments are really good at producing anxious presenting autistic people, and the reason is specific. In those environments, the social rules are real, consequential, and never fully written down. They shift. They're enforced inconsistently, and getting them wrong carries spiritual weight. You're not just awkward, you're rebellious. You're not submitted. Something is wrong with your faith. The cost of misreading the room isn't just social embarrassment. It's your standing with God and your community. For someone whose brain has to work harder to read the room, the consequences come more often from directions that weren't anticipated, for reasons that are genuinely unclear. And over time, you develop real fear, real anxiety about whether you're reading things correctly. The monitoring becomes both a neurological compensation and a trauma response at the same time. They get so tangled together that neither you nor anyone trying to help you can tell where one ends and the other one begins. What comes out of that is someone who looks from the outside like anxious attachment. And it's also something the anxious attachment framework was never designed to explain. This matters for what healing actually looks like. The fear layer, the relational trauma, the spiritual shame, the years of getting it wrong in an environment that told you the problem was your character, that responds to trauma work. EMDR, somatic work, slowly separating your nervous system's learned fear from who you actually are. That part can genuinely heal. But if there's a neurological layer underneath it, if part of the monitoring was always compensatory and not fear-based, that part doesn't heal because it was never wounded. Trying to need the script less, trying to stop replaying conversations, trying to be more spontaneous and less prepared, that isn't healing. That's just exhausting yourself trying to be a different kind of brain. I want to offer you something that the anxious attachment framework almost never offers: permission. The anxious attachment framework needs to treat hypervigilance as the problem. The work is to monitor less, need less reassurance, trust more, let relationships breathe without so much effort. And for purely fear-driven anxious attachment, that makes sense. As the fear heals, the vigilance softens. But if part of what looks like hypervigilance is just your system compensating, and that's real necessary work, then trying to need it less is just gonna wear you out. You'll spend years in therapy trying to stop doing the thing that your brain needs to do to function. And when it doesn't stop, you'll think you're not healing fast enough, that something is wrong with your progress. Nothing is wrong with your progress. You might just be working from the wrong map. The script before the hard conversation, or the current video you're making, that might not be something to overcome. It might be a completely reasonable accommodation for how your brain works. And the energy is better spent understanding why you need it than trying to become someone who doesn't. The replaying afterward, that might not be rumination to interrupt and reframe. It might be how you learn, how you calibrate, how you build the social map that other people seem to receive without effort. Fighting it might be costing you more than it's giving you. The careful word choice, the wanting to present all the information, the desire to get it right, a doctor looked at that and called it anxiety. But I didn't feel anxious. I felt precise, and precise was the right word. Your read on your own inner world is accurate. The outside was being misread, and you are allowed to trust yourself on that. I'll say this from my own experience. The moment I stopped trying to be less careful and started understanding why I needed to be careful, something shifted. Not because the carefulness went away. That's never going away. That's a part of who I am. But because I stopped treating it as evidence that something was wrong with me. It was evidence of how hard my brain was working all along, and those are not the same thing. Your inner world has always been data, even when nobody was asking for it. Even when you learned to hand that authority over to everyone else's reading of your outside instead. It was still accurate, and you are allowed to trust it. If this is landing, the most useful next step is finding someone who can help you sort out which layers are which. What's fear that needs processing? What's a neurological difference that needs accommodating? And what's the place where those two things got fused together in an environment that named everything wrong? That's specific work. It requires someone who understands trauma and understands autism, not as separate things, but as experiences that interact in complicated ways in the same person. If you're in Nevada, Colorado, Utah, or New Jersey, that's exactly the work I do. And if you haven't watched the avoidant version of this conversation, that video is linked in the description too. Together, they cover more ground than either one does alone. And if this helped something click, share it with someone who has been told they're anxious their whole life and never quite recognized themselves in that description. Sometimes the most important thing is finding out that your own read was right all along.